Well, hello everyone and welcome. This is the Cosmic Connection. And today we're going to be doing a couple different things. We're going to be starting off where we left off last week, which was all about reincarnation and Saturn and Pluto. So if you missed that episode, you could go back and catch it after this one. And then we're going to talk about Mars squaring basically everyone and what that means for you, because it's the energy that we're going to be with from now until the end of the year. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Amanda Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub, and I am here with Rick Merlin Levine. Welcome. It's so great to be here.
Hello. It's Thursday afternoon, and it's lovely to be here. And trying to remain consistent to my past appearances here, I think I need to start out with an apology.
No. Why? What'd you do this time?
There are people who think I cut you off and mistreat you, and I'm not that with you. So I would like to apologize on behalf of all men in the world ever who have ever mistreated a woman, and certainly personally from me to you, because I get very excited, as you know, and I feel like let me put it this way. I assume that you're a strong enough woman that if I was offending you by cutting you off, you would tell me. Now,
I absolutely would.
Yes. And maybe that's overstating it, but but when one person types something in a chat, or in a comment, I take it with a grain of salt. But if more than one person says it, I just want to respect that. I've heard that. And so I'm going to do my best to be nicer to you online.
Thank you. Well, we're here to listen to you. And I love how your train of thought goes. And I've noticed you need to get to the very end of it because it's moving itself, and you have a way that you bring the story around. So I love to just let you go to the very end of it, and then we can talk.
Of course, there are times when I have no idea where that train is going and it's a runaway. So I appreciate being stopped at times. Anyhow,
that happens.
You're in charge.
All right. So let's talk about reincarnation. So that was our talk last week. And then
you would ask the question.
I did. My question was, with all the Saturn and Pluto energy this year, it's major emphasis on that in 2020. Are these ideas around reincarnation and disincarnation that we talked about last week, why or how would they be especially relevant now?
Okay. There's two answers here that are very separate and yet they're both relevant, and they both can be explained very, very, very quickly. First of all, it's important to note that whenever slow-moving planets make alignments, like Saturn lining up with Pluto, or like in the 1960s when Uranus lined up with Pluto, or in the late 80s, early 90s when Uranus lined up with Neptune, whenever that happens, it's almost like there's portals. I almost hate to use the word portal with so much hype around the Lion's Gate, and I'm not going there. That's a whole separate issue. It's actually a non-astrological issue because it really has nothing to do with astrology. Anyhow, but when outer planets line up, they do open up portals. They open up gateways to other dimensions, and then it's almost like we lose our egos and we jump into these other dimensions, and then we come back down and we live back in this dimension after that portal closes, and yet we don't forget what we see. Now, why is that relevant? It's relevant because when these portals are open, it enables more stuff to come in from other times, other places, other dimensions. And of course, tying this back to my talk last week on reincarnation, it's my personal understanding that when there is any form of reincarnation, it's the spirit, the energy, the disincarnate consciousness, which exists in some other dimension where there is no linear time. When we imagine it or are guided to open to it through a hypnotic trance or a guided meditation, or whether it occurs spontaneously, that energy reincarnates in this moment. And so during these outer planet transit periods, like all of 2020 into early 2021, because of the not just Saturn Pluto, but Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter kind of all doing that dance all year, it's like we're in one of these portals. So that's the first reason why the topic is of more of interest now, because people are more open to having their own personal experiences of this, whether it is guided, induced, or spontaneous. The second reason is a little bit trickier, but I think on some levels it's even more important. And it helps us understand another whole facet of astrology that I think sometimes escapes understanding. And most people know the word synchronicity. Something is called synchronic. The word chronic comes from the same word that Saturn comes from. Saturn is Latin for Chronos, which is Greek. The way the ringed planet, that's Chronos in Greek. So something that is chronic is something that has the weight of Saturn. It's heavier. And in fact, there are two types of time. There's Kairos and Chronos. And Chronos measures the tick-tock clock time, whereas Kairos measures more of an emotional time. It measures more of the feeling of time, which is two different ways of looking at time itself. So we know the word synchronicity or synchronic, which means same, like synonym, same name, same time. Synchronos is same time. Most of us do not know the word diachronic. And diachronic or diachronicity describes things that have still that Jungian concept, I'm making air quotes here, of what Jung called, quote unquote, meaningful coincidence. Now, in the West, we take an incident and say that's one thing. And if two things happen at the same time, we basically say that's a coincidence or coincidence. But in doing so, we dismiss it as if two things happening at the same time is an accident. And so the word coincidence doesn't have an emotional component of meaning less important. It actually means two things that happen at the same time. An incident that happens at the same moment as another incident, coincident. So the word synchronicity is at the same time, and we know that Jung's meaningful coexistence states that when two things happen at the same time, they're expressing the same quality of time in that moment, and therefore can have a connection that isn't obvious to the Western linear cause and effect sense of time. The word diachronic or diachronicity, dia comes from the same Greek root as diagnosis. And gnosis means to know. A diagnosis isn't really name that disease. A diagnosis really means through knowing. And dia is across or through. So diachronos, diachronic, means across time. Meaningful connections or coincidences that happen at different times. Now, how can that be? Well, I'll give you an example. The worst recorded epidemic on the planet was probably the Black Plague or Black Death in the around 1450 in Europe. That plague lasted from about 1457 to 1453. At the height of that.
You mean 1447 to 14?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Like, how to go backwards? Okay.
Yeah. That's retrochronicity. Okay. From 1447 to about 1453. Those are normally, if you Google Black Death, that's the date range. The height of it was in 1450, the year of a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So what seems to happen somehow is that there are meaningful coincidences over time that keep bringing the same event again and again and again. I've used this example in my teachings on this subject, and I'll get just as one example, and I could give you 20. But in 1898, Mahatma Gandhi spent most of the year in jail in South Africa because he was working at getting the Indians, the East Indian Indians, excluded from apartheid as practiced in South Africa. And he did that successfully. That was 1898. And that was a Saturn-Pluto opposition. At the next Saturn-Pluto opposition in 1931, Gandhi spends pretty much the year in jail again. This time it was in India, and it was for leading what we call the Salt March, which was he led native Indians. I always feel like Indian, you know what I mean, Indians. Native Indians to the sea where they boiled water and made salt. And that was illegal because it was one of the primary taxes that the Brits had on the Indians, was taxing the purchase of salt. So you couldn't make your own clothes, and you had to buy them from the English or through that distribution, and you couldn't make your own salt. So Gandhi spends much of that year, Saturn-Pluto opposition, in jail in 1931. At the next conjunction in August of 1947, within 5 days of the exact conjunction, England, or Great Britain, basically gives India its independence. And we in the West, most of us, I know I learned as a youth in school, that this was amazing without a war, without anyone firing a shot. This person, just through their steadfast belief in their peaceful resistance, brought down the most powerful empire in the world. And yet they forgot to tell us that approximately 500,000 people were killed in border fighting between what became India and Pakistan, between the Hindus and the Muslims, over the control and ownership of the Kashmir Valley. So that was all at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 1947. I mean, exactly on it was when India and Pakistan were granted their freedom from the British Empire. At the following conjunction in 1982, the movie Gandhi came out. And for anyone who was alive during that period of time and old enough to remember, that wasn't just a movie. That movie, when it came out, was a cultural phenomenon. I mean, everyone went to see it, not because of the story of the movie, but because it told such an important story of our time. And that was 1982 at the previous conjunction. Now at this current conjunction, Kashmir, Pakistan, and India again is a tinderbox. It never went away. But do you see how this is diachronicity? It's the same damn event. And that same thing works in astrology, even when we look at transits through our lives. And I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole, other than to say, for example, if you track all the times that Saturn made a conjunction, square, opposition, square again, conjunction again, and etc., to, let's say, your sun or your moon, and you take that all the way through your life, you go, oh my God, it's kind of like it's almost the same event, but it's reappearing at different points in my life, so it appears very, very differently. What does this have to do with reincarnation? Well, it is reincarnation, because it's not past life regression or experiencing a past life, but something happens where the energy, which is no longer held incarnate form, somehow when the planetary patterns repeat, like a Saturn-Pluto, everything that's ever happened in all of history under Saturn-Pluto conjunctions or conjunctions oppositions somehow resonate to this moment. and the ones that have the most relevance to this moment, whether it's pandemic, whether it's Hong Kong and China, and of course the Hong Kong treaty with Great Britain was signed in 1898 that, gave it a 99-year lease. Then that's up now, whether it's certain conflicts, whether they're religious or territorial conflicts. Again and again and again, we see the same issues. And so the issue of reincarnation is not just about past lives. It seems to be a very basic component of how resonance hums or reincarnates energy back into the present moment, that even though it appears to be in the past, that the past is actually in the present.
Rick, do you think when we come in, we are still playing out the pattern from whatever we were doing when we died in the last lifetime?
I'd like to say yes, but I won't, because I don't know.
Right.
And I would also like to say that for everyone who thinks that we sign a contract when we come in, some sort of like, this is the contract for our life, if that's the case, I don't think they give us time to read the fine print.
Yeah.
Otherwise we'd never, we read the headlines, section 1, section 2, section 3, section
Right.
4. But we don't read that in section 3.57, it says you're going to experience, 30 years of famine or whatever.
Right. Well, and do you think that the reason why these energies keep reappearing is to give us the opportunity to work out the knots? I mean, last week you said that our chart is just showing knots of energy, right?
Nodes. A knot is a node. And yes, until things become invisible when the energy is no longer tied up in a knot.
Mm.
Yeah.
So if you look back on your life and you look at those patterns and you see that you've moved into a new way of relating with those patterns, would it be safe to say that you've worked out those knots on some level?
It would be safe but premature to say that. Yes, I think that is a statement, but it reminds me of everyone I've ever known, myself included, who have said, "Oh yeah, I used to be like that. I worked that one through.
I'm done with that one."
And only 8 years later to go, "Oh crap, how did I get here again?" Yeah, I don't think it's quite, enlightenment isn't a one-time shot. It's something
Right.
like the center of the onion. As the outer layers grow, there's always that thing of having to get back toward the center that we thought we were at.
Okay, a couple more questions before we move on to Mars squaring everyone. The portal opening and closing. So you said when the outer planets are lining up, it's like a portal or a gateway opening. Does that make that period of time more karmic for people?
Well, yes, it makes it more karmic for people, but it also makes it more karmic in the bigger scheme of things. So I have this image in my head of some, 300, 500 million years ago. My numbers may be off here because I'm not a real geologist. But at that time, there was life in the ocean, but there was no life on land. There were no mammals on the land. And I have this image of some fish that were maybe a group of fish that were like smarter than the other fish. And they began to realize that when they got up a lot of speed and they jumped out of the water and they looked around, they went, "Holy shit, there's an entire universe," and kerplunk, and back into the water. And that they realized they couldn't survive up there, but there was something about that. And whether these fish were just smarter fish or whether they nibbled on certain algae that were psychedelic, that basically, encouraged them to take these excursions out of their normal environment, I don't know. But I do know that over the course of maybe millions of years, that these fish somehow, through intention, through direction, through evolution, there are those finger quotes again, they began to develop more lung power until eventually they were amphibians, and eventually they were mammals on the ocean. I mean, out of the ocean, on the land. Now, it's my image, and this is not real science, folks. I can do real science. This is not science. But it's my image that in some way, these fish that kind of had these insights of, oh my God, there's an entire universe out there that we don't get to live in yet, that those were the same types of karmic lifetimes for fish, or psychedelic, not meaning drugs, but meaning mind, psyche, mind, delia, expansion, that in some ways are the same things that happen when outer planets align, that bring us out of that egoic state into this kind of more karmic or larger state of awareness. And then as the time settles down, after the 60s, we had the 70s and 80s, we close back down, but we don't forget the images, and the images of intentions and so on that were created, I think, become very karmic in the future.
So we should take advantage of this time with this expanded awareness. I mean, are you all experiencing that? Like, do you in some ways feel like the fish that's looking up and going, oh my gosh, I can't believe there's so much more? I'd just love to hear what people say in the chat.
When you say you all, if you meant me, the answer is yes. If you meant you all, yeah, love to hear from you.
I meant everyone who's out there, but you included.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I know, me too.
That's why we're here. That's why we're here now.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so let's talk about Mars. Mars is squaring Pluto today, correct?
Yeah, it was exact by degree and minute earlier this morning, I believe.
But this is going to be relevant all the way through the end of the year and even into 2021, correct? So that's why we wanted to talk about it, because it's not just like a little instance that will be gone.
Yes, exactly. The actual square itself was at 3:13 a.m. this morning. That would be Eastern time, which meant that it was last night, late on the 12th, for those of us on the West Coast or in Hawaii. So yeah, technically that aspect is over, and that aspect occurred because Pluto, which is now retrograde, was at 23 degrees and 5 minutes of Capricorn, when Mars hit 23 degrees Aries in 5 minutes, 23 degrees and 5 minutes of Aries. That was when the square was exactly direct. But you see, by tomorrow, Mars is only at 23 degrees, still less than 23 and a half degrees. And by the 15th, Mars is still at 23, still not even at 24 degrees. So that's 3 days at the same degree. Normally, Mars can move a degree every 2 days when it's cruising. But right now, Mars is already slowing down because Mars turns retrograde on September 9th, which is almost a month away. But Mars has the weirdest pattern of all the planets. It was the riddle that Tycho Brahe, who was the Danish astronomer who accumulated the most accurate data ever. It was the data, his observation data on Mars, that he gave to Johannes Kepler because it was the most complicated, and he knew Kepler would never figure it out. And Kepler did figure it out. And when Kepler figured out this, he actually said he was so overwhelmed when he recalculated the orbit of Mars based upon his calculations and showed that they matched Tycho Brahe's observations, and that Ptolemy's calculations were off by 8 minutes of orb, 8 minutes of accuracy over a year, and that Kepler's calculations were exactly right on. And he said, I have robbed the ancient crypts of Egypt, the ancient sacred crypts of Egypt, and it is I have touched mountains, and it is tremendous what they belch forth. I mean, he was like, is the first time a human being had made calculations that extended into the cosmic realm, and he realized he was in awe of what, of what had happened. I won't even say of what he did, but of what came through him at that time. So you see, the thing about Mars is that it takes Mars almost 2 years to go around the zodiac once from Earth's point of view. However, it races through 11 signs at about a sign a month and a half, in that range. And then it ends up, because of its retrograde period, it ends up spending about 5 months in the same area of the sky. No other planet has that kind of weird retrograde cycle to it. And it doesn't fit into anything that makes any sense. So here we have Mars that entered Aries back at the end of June. That's when Mars entered Aries. Now, again, Mars has been spending about 2 months in each sign, a little bit less than that, actually. So about 7 weeks in a sign. Mars enters Aries the end of June, and it doesn't enter Taurus until the beginning of January. So that means that Mars is in Aries all of July, August, September, October, November, December, and another 2 weeks, one on either side, the end of June, beginning of January. And then Mars quickly gains speed again. And once it's moved into Taurus, it's back to its, and in a way I find it fascinating because the planets actually seem to physically exhibit what they are interpreted to mean symbolically. There's a thing in herbalism called the Doctrine of Signatures. Have you ever heard of that? The Doctrine of Signatures says that Merlin, for example, which looks like the inside of a lung, it has that fuzzy, it looks like the cilia. There's a word for what the inside of the lungs is. The word isn't coming to me. But the plant looks like, and Merlin is used as a lung enhancer. And so it's like plants look like what they do in the body. Well, planets do the same damn thing. And if you think of it, Mars is almost like, the symbol of Mars is like that arrow. So if you think of an archer, and I'm not meaning Sagittarius, but you think of an archer taking an arrow, putting it in his bow, and pulling back on that bow for like 2 or 3 months, and then holding it, and then aiming, and then releasing it. But when you release the arrow, it's not moving at full speed. It's like watching like a spacecraft, like a rocket ship launch. At first, it's just barely moving, and then it gains speed the arrow, the same thing. So that the arrow is moving very slowly, and then it gains speed, and by the time it leaves the bow, that's when it's going at maximum speed. And then it races around the zodiac until it goes through that same process again. And can you get a feeling for what I'm saying? And so Mars retrograde, more than all the other planets, I think it builds the most power. It builds the most strength. It's the greatest difference between its retrograde and its direct movement of any of the planets. So that's, kind of like just an observation about Mars itself. And we are right now in the midst of a 6.5 month period where Mars is not only retrograde, but it's retrograde in its home sign. Just like Saturn, when it lined up with Pluto, was lined up with Pluto while Saturn was in its own sign. And so there's something here that gives a planet more strength, more power. It's not better or worse. It just is more at home with being in its own sign. So what is Mars and what is its home sign, Aries? Well, it's interesting that the word Aries is in Greek, the god of war. Mars in Greek is Aries. It's the, again, the ancients don't necessarily see everything in the same way that we do. But Mars is the conflict that occurs at the edge of a boundary. It's associated with anger because anger creates a ridge. When anger is expressed in a healthy manner, that is the way we protect our boundaries, whether it's my physical, personal boundaries, my emotional boundaries, whether it's the boundaries of my company that I work for that I'm loyal to, or my family, or my heritage, or my country, or my species, or my planet. When those boundaries are messed with, that's where Mars the warrior in a healthy manner goes to work. When Mars is unhealthy, it's insecure and it can overstate its need to defend its boundaries. So rather than simply defending its boundaries, it's aggressing into your space and messing with your boundaries, but really as a way to firm up my own insecurity. And of course, this is the delicate dance that we make as a species, as an individual, every day in our lives. Is this something worth fighting about? And if it's something worth fighting about, is it something worth hurting someone else if necessary? Well, maybe if my life is in danger, it is. I mean, there are some people who would say, no, even if my life is in danger, fighting like that is never worth it. So I'm not trying to say what someone's belief should be. I'm just painting the picture that to the ancients, Mars was a malefic. The malefics were Mars and Saturn because they were much harder energies to work with. If the ancients knew about Pluto, they probably would have included Pluto. They might have included Uranus and Neptune also. But in the system of astrology, Mars is certainly a badass planet because its energy is hard to contain, because when we get emotionally stirred, we get angry and we overreact. Mars is spontaneous. Mars is fire. It's primal fire. And here's the interesting thing about Mars, or one of many, and that is that Mars, the astronomers call Mars the angry red planet. Why is it red, and why is red associated with anger? Well, it's red because iron burns slowly, and we call that rust. Iron oxidizes, it mixes with that's what fire is. Fire is oxidation. And so when iron burns, it creates rust. And it turns out that Mars is largely, the surface of Mars is red because it's largely iron. It's rust. It's burned iron. And iron is also the material that in the original, going back into history, it was the original tool of war. Well, after stones, because with iron, we actually could make an edge, and we could forge tools that actually held their edge. And so Mars is associated with the cutting edge of a knife, of anything that cuts through, whether it's a knife or a bullet, or these are all Mars associations. On the other hand, Mars is also associated with the exacting cutting edge of a surgeon's blade who can save your life. So Mars in itself is neither good nor bad, but Mars takes on external reality through action, through fire. One other thing here about the concept of fire, and this applies not only to Mars and its home sign of Aries, but also the fire signs Leo and Sagittarius. And that is, in the Jungian construct, fire was associated with intuition. And I know I've mentioned this before. A lot of us moderners think, oh, Pisces, they're intuitive. Cancerians are water is intuitive. It feels. Well, water has that ability to feel, but there's a difference between hypersensitivity and intuition, because intuition is almost like there is no feeling, there is no thought. There's a direct putting the whole picture together and acting on it without any language or conscious emotion. And if you think about it, a fire doesn't have to go to school to learn what burns and what doesn't burn. A fire doesn't need to sit and think, should I go this way or that way? Maybe those pine trees over there will be harder to burn because it just rained. Maybe I should go for that. No, a fire just stays alive. And so Mars can be dangerous because it'll do anything to stay alive, even if it means overcompensating. So that's an opening little statement about Mars. And In the spirit of full disclosure, my birth Mars is in Aries, very closely aligned with my sun in Aries, and very closely conjunct my Mercury and my Venus and Eris, all in Aries, with a North Node in Aries too. So if I come on a little strong sometimes to people, it's not because I'm a jerk or I'm mean. It's just that when I'm, one of the classic Mars words or Aries words is enthusiasm, because enthusiasm really means with God. And I'm not saying I'm godly. I'm saying that when the ego steps out of the way, when there is no thought, when there is no feeling, and we're working on intuition, if we're downloading stuff, we get enthused. Now that shit may not be good shit, but there's still an enthusiasm, and that enthusiasm at times certainly can seem to someone on the outside like a steamroller. And to all of those people, I'll apologize again. It's part of what I bring to the game, for better and for worse.
Okay. So Mars, healthy, is defending boundary. The anger comes out to defend boundaries in a healthy way.
Ego survival.
Okay. And when it's unhealthy, then the aggression moves into the other space, and it's coming from a place of insecurity. So it's overcompensating.
The bully.
Yeah, the bully. Okay. So in an already intense year that also happens to be super Marsy, because we have Mars and Aries for so long, how does these squares, like, so squares are edgy also, right? Like squares are edgy, and then Mars is squaring what, you were saying would be a malefic. We have Mars squaring Saturn, we have Mars squaring Pluto, we have Mars squaring Jupiter. How does all that translate for us?
Big opportunity and big trap.
Okay.
Simultaneously. I mean, yeah, Mars is the bully planet. And Mars can only bully so far. And when it bullies Saturn goes, you ain't bullying me anymore. Stop. So here, it's interesting that in ancient astrology and classical astrology, every planet has a sign they're at home in, and they also have a sign that they're not at home in, but that they love being in because they're treated like a special guest. And in astrology, that's called the planet's exaltation. For example, the moon, which is at home in Cancer, is exalted in Taurus. It loves being in Taurus because it gets to indulge safely and it feels comfortable, even though the moon is always changing. In Taurus, it gives it the stability that it needs to feel comfortable. Well, Mars, which is at home in Aries and in the ancient astrology, also at home in Scorpio. So that's important to this whole scenario, because in modern astrology, we've replaced the planet at home in Scorpio. We've replaced Mars with Pluto. And Pluto is one of the planets right now that Mars is duking it out with. And I say duking it out because you said squares are kind of edgy, but they're edgy because the 90-degree angle is basically, a physicist would call the 90-degree angle the angle of maximum interference. What that means is that when two cycles are beating against each other with a 90-degree displacement, that they have the most destructive power on one another. Because if you're going this way and I'm going that way, there's no way that we can go in the same direction that we want to go in. We have to go someplace that's in the middle, but that's hard with a 90-degree angle because the planets are so engaged. And what typically happens is the planets duke it out and one gains dominance over the other. Anyone who has a square in their chart, one of the struggles is, how do I act like this planet in the square without taking that planet in the square and making it invisible? Because as soon as you do, that's when you run into trouble. How do you keep both of those planets in your mind or in your life at the same time? So yes, squares are edgy, they're conflictive, but the positive thing about squares is that they are the most dynamic aspect, in as much as that dynamic creativity is the positive expression of a square. When you see a birth chart without any squares, that person might struggle to be motivated to do what it thinks it wants to do, or what they want to do, or what they want to be. And yet when you see a planet with squares, sometimes people fall at the wrong end of their squares and they become overwhelming. But sometimes it's the people who accomplish the most in the life, the people who live the most productive, useful, loving, caring, influential lives are the people who have figured out how to make the most of their squares. So yes, a square can be edgy, but it also is as Ram Dass would say, it's the grist for the mill. We need something to run through that mill to make the flour, and a square becomes that. But these squares are particularly interesting because Mars, at home in Aries, is exalted in Capricorn. That's Mars's favorite place to be. So Mars has a inherent and deep respect for the structure of Capricorn, because when Mars is in Capricorn, Mars in Aries has a problem, and its problem is that it loves starting fires, but it hates sustaining them or finishing them or dealing with the after effects of them. And in Capricorn, Mars will start the fire, it'll work the fire, it'll build the fire, it'll sustain the fire, and it'll deal with the cleanup after the fire's gone. And so Mars is exalted in Capricorn because Saturn, who's at home in Capricorn, Saturn's staying power basically gives Mars an envelope, a structure, a stability that Mars otherwise can lack. Because Mars can get fired up about whatever the bug up its butt is for that hour and put everything spontaneously into the urgency of that moment, forgetting about what happened 10 minutes ago or what might happen as a result in 10 minutes. So this particular square of Mars, not just a square from Mars to Pluto, but it's a square from Mars to Jupiter, Mars to Pluto, and Mars to Saturn in that order, because Jupiter right now is the lowest degree of those of the three Capricorn planets. And I'm not going to honor Ann Ortley's projection, calling these the COVID cluster. I'd rather just refer to them as the Capricorn cluster or Capricorn cluster.
Brett's calling it the Capricorn Council. Gemini
Capricorn
Brett.
Council. Yeah, on a bad day, I've called it the Capricorn cluster. Whatever. But the fact of the matter is that in this Capricorn, in this very rare Capricorn cluster, remember the last time Saturn and Pluto just by themselves were together in Capricorn was in 1518, which was the year within a few months of when Martin Luther basically protested against the authority of the Catholic Church, which had absolute authority at the time. This is a replication of that, but even then, Jupiter was not there also. So right now, we have this Capricorn cluster that has today has Jupiter at the lowest end, Jupiter at about 18 degrees. Let's see, today is so Jupiter is about 18 degrees of Capricorn. Pluto is about 23 degrees of Capricorn, and Saturn is about 26 degrees of Capricorn. Now, Mars moving slowly direct is going to make a square individually exactly to each of those points. But because Mars is moving so slowly right now, Mars made the square to Jupiter on August 4th, a few weeks ago. It made the square to Pluto exactly late last night or early this morning on the 12th or the 13th, depending on where you are. And it makes the square to Saturn next week, actually almost a week and a half on the 24th. So all of August has some aspect of Mars squaring Capricorn planets. Now, let's just break them down very quickly individually, and we could do a whole session on any one of these three breakdowns. But when Mars squares Jupiter, Mars overamps. This is the beginning of August. Mars overamps because Jupiter is Jupiter's a benefic. It says good, better, more, great. And so Jupiter is encouraging Mars, which isn't necessarily always a good thing. In fact, we saw the Beirut explosion as a Jupiter-Mars expression where something was way bigger than it could have, should have, needed to be, because it was like a tinderbox waiting to happen, and then that Mars, lights the fire and Jupiter expands it. And there were other explosions and have been around the planet. Mars, Jupiter by itself isn't necessarily explosive, it's expansive. But that's where we began the month. Then by the middle of the month, we move to the Mars square Pluto, and Pluto plays a deeper game. Remember that Pluto, which we've talked about a bit in the last weeks, especially when we talked about reincarnation, because Pluto moves so slowly, we never even get to experience a whole Pluto cycle. It's 240 some odd years, 243, 44 years. And so when Mars squares Pluto, now remember, Pluto's the modern ruler of Scorpio, which is Mars's other home sign. So Mars and Pluto have a little bit of affinity because they're both warriors, kinda. But Mars is about the battle in the moment, and Pluto is about I'll be here to finish this damn thing when you're long gone. Mm. Pluto is about the evolutionary transformation that occurs after the battle is over. It's been said that you can win every battle and lose the war. Well, that's Mars, every battle, and that's the war, Pluto. And so part of the square between Mars and Pluto is having the awareness that it's more important to win the war than to fight and win every battle. Because you can fight every battle and win it and be so exhausted that the opponent, your nemesis, the bad guy, the evil twin, the dark side, whatever you want to call it, actually ends up winning the entire situation. And so often the highest function of Mars is often awareness of what the edge is, awareness of the conflict, awareness of what can be done, and awareness of what it makes sense not to do in the moment, because it just feeds. Remember, it's the grist for the mill. It puts so much grist in the mill that the mill jams, and then there's all this unground wheat that there's nothing to do with because we've just destroyed the mill itself. So this is part of the downside, or the thing about Mars square Pluto. Anne has called this a war aspect, and it is. And she also correctly said after that, in recent time that I listened to you guys, is that it's not only the war aspect; it's in its higher manifestation. It is the energy that we put towards the good of the all. I always think of this as Mr. Spock in the original Star Trek, who always used to say the need of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Mm-hmm. Well, Mars is the needs of the few. Actually, Mars is the need of the one, the very few. Mars is my ego, my need. Now, the ego is not a bad thing. The ego's job is to ensure that I survive. Your ego's job is to ensure that you survive. Now, what happens is that the need of my survival is less important than the need of the survival of everyone. And this is really a deeper message of Mars square Pluto, because we can get caught up in my survival is more important than anyone else's, everyone else's, and yours in particular, whoever you might be. So that's Mars square Pluto, which is going on right now. Now, if Mars was moving really fast, it would be a day or two and it would be over. But this has been going on for weeks, and it'll continue to go on for weeks, because even when Mars is no longer exactly lined up next week or the week after, it'll still only be a degree or two away. And so that energy is there. And remember, the Jupiter-Pluto-Saturn cluster itself, even though there's three separate points, Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, three separate points. Together, they're making one big point. And so all through this, Mars is squaring that big point, even though there are three differentiated points out of it. The first was its square to Jupiter back at the beginning of August. The second was its square, or is it square to Pluto now? And then the third is its square to Saturn, which is in effect the finality here right now, but it won't be the final finality. And I'll come back to that in just a moment, because by the 24th of this month, Mars squares Saturn, and Mars is the gas pedal. Mars is how we go forward. Mars is the assertion, is the aggression, it's the direction. It's how I get to where I'm going. Saturn is the brake. Mars is the accelerator, Saturn's the brake. Mars is the motivation for getting there, and Saturn is the hard work I have to do to get there. Saturn is the structure within which I need to work. Mars is hot, Saturn's cold. Mars is yes, Saturn is no. Now, Saturn says no basically because he wants you to succeed, but often that no is you don't have it right yet. No, this isn't the right time. No, that's against the law. No, but really, Saturn holds us back like a functional parent so that we can be even more awesome. The problem is that, as we know by looking at our government, for example, or looking at many of the religious structures in our lives, that Saturn often appears in an aberrated form, making rules that are stupid or even harmful, or suppressing or repressing things that are individually healthy, if not healthy for the structure itself. And so that's the problem with too much Saturn. But the square between Saturn and Mars, in some ways, is the heat of excitement, of passion, of intention. The fire of enthusiasm hits the wall of the law. You know, you protest, you go to jail. You get sprayed upon with pepper sprays or hit by rubber bullets, whatever. This is an overamping, authoritative Saturn. And Saturn is authority. But authority isn't necessarily always good, just like war, Mars, is not always bad. Here, however, we have building toward the end of the month, we have this dynamic square between yes and no, between do it and don't do it, between I should have done it, but I didn't do it, damn it, or I did do it and I shouldn't have done it, damn it. And so it's hard to work out how much heat to apply during a Mars-Saturn square. And often the textbooks say that Mars-Saturn together in any aspect, in any hard aspect, conjunction, square, opposition, half square, square and a half, that Mars-Saturn together, like in hard aspects, is frustrating. It's frustrating because I can be running forward with really a great idea and a great goal, and my head hits the wall. You know, or I go too fast and I go off the curve because there's no guard wall. That authority is not there. The Saturn is not there. So that's the danger of that Mars-Saturn. So those are the three pieces. Mars square Jupiter, expansion, enthusiasm, overamping. Mars square Pluto, a deeper underlying transformation that may not be apparent until the long run. And then Mars square Saturn, the direct confrontation of hot and cold, of do it and don't do it. And that's being set up in August, except when a planet moves slower, it gains more power. That's why Pluto is so powerful, because it moves so slowly. That's why Mercury, when it turns stationary or direct, has so much power, because when a planet moves, even a fast planet, when it moves slower to turn direct or retrograde, it gains power. And right now, fast, speedy Mars in impulsive, overamping, spontaneous Aries is slowing down. And as it's slowing down, it's being called to task by the planets in the sign that it respects and it hates, because Capricorn says, don't do it. Go slower. Respect authority. work within the structure. And Saturn is just this, but I got this TNT in my pocket. I got these nuclear weapons in my other pocket. I got righteousness and righteousness on my side. And screw you, I'm going to take this whole thing down. And the Capricorn Council, as Brett would call them, is very wise here to inform Mars that with all of the heat that it has right now, that taking it slower will give it more long-term influence and positive energy than simply putting everything into the conflict hour by hour and day by day. So Mars slows down and turns retrograde on September 9th. And that sets up part 2 and part 3 of this 3-part scenario. Each of these 3 parts having one direct, next retrograde, and third direct. Each of these 3 parts of the 3-part scenario having 3 parts. And that is Mars' square to each of these 3 planets.
Wow. Okay. So that Saturn square, would you say that it's do the thing, but not right now? Like, whatever the thing is that you might be carrying with you that you're feeling amped or enthusiastic or hot about.
Yeah.
This is a thing. It could be the right thing, but just not right now. Or it could be the right thing, but like maybe it needs to be tweaked a little bit, or the timing.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's not even that the timing is there, but it's not an excuse to not do it. It's a cosmic invitation to do it in as wise and calculated a manner as possible to get the most effect rather than the fastest and the most immediate effect. You see, Mars likes immediate gratification. Matter of fact, that's all Mars knows about is immediate gratification. I'm in a battle with you right now. I'm going to give it everything I got. You know, if it's a cold night and I have 30 logs, I'm going to burn all of them because I'll figure out tomorrow. That's one of the downsides of Mars. The upside of Capricorn here is it tells Mars, you got 4 nights of cold yet. Try to get by with only 5 or 6 logs a night, and then you'll even have a couple left over if you need them if the last couple of nights are even colder.
Okay.
But it's not saying don't do it.
Okay. It's not saying don't do it. It just needs a little bit more finessing or it's gonna change a little bit, whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Now, would you say that, going back to our previous conversation about knots or nodes and themes, would you say that the content, the thematic content of whatever is happening in our lives right now is the thematic content we'll be working through these 3 passes, or might that change too?
That's a tough one. It reminds me of the saying, one of my favorite sayings, in theory and practice are the same.
Okay.
But in practice, they are not.
Okay.
In theory, what you're saying is absolutely true. But in practice, it's relatively not necessarily completely true. So we need to be careful because even the structures of what our engagements, of what we think they are now, can evolve and change. And we need to be open to that, because the battle that we're fighting now to win the war might be a slightly different battle than it is in 6 months, when we realize the war might actually be a slightly different war that we're involved in and didn't really know it. But what you're saying, in theory, I agree with you. It's a good statement. But in practice, we need to be careful about making those assumptions. Or if we do make those assumptions, at least stay open to the fact that can change. Often with retrograde things that happen with a direct, retrograde, direct, and 3 times, it's like the first time something happens and we think it's done, and then it's almost like driving down the freeway in the left-hand lane, and we go, oh crap, there's our exit, and we somehow get over 5 lanes on the I-5 in LA, and we get over 5 lanes and we get off our exit and we go, phew, now I can rest. And we look up and we see a sign, your exit, half mile, and it's 5 lanes over again. And we go, wait a minute, I just did that. and it's like a deja vu all over again. And we have to do that same thing again. And then we do it again only to find out that we're on the wrong lane. And now we have to get over 10 lanes the other way. So it's like the same event keeps coming around, but we see it from different perspectives. And that's kind of the diachronic craziness of how things are connected over time. They're not exactly the same.
Well, and like you said, we might just not have the awareness yet of what it's actually about. So we may think it's about something, but it's actually about something different or something more inclusive.
Or we might not have had all the facts. Because remember, there is Pluto here. And there are things that are coming out into the open that basically say, we all look back in our life and go, oh, if I'd only known that then, I would have done this, not that. Well, in a microcosmic or smaller perspective, this may happen over these months where we look back and go, well, shit, if I only knew that, then I wouldn't have been thinking I needed to do that. I would have been doing this. So all we need to do is allow for that. It's not like we need to change any of our, immediate behavior or anything.
Okay. So in summary.
Oh, wait a minute. Is this summary or summary of where we are so far?
Well, I can wait for the summary till the end.
Okay. Well, okay. Because before we do a summary, we need to just make sure we understand that this whole scenario we just discussed for all of August, because Mars turns retrograde in September, by the end of September, Mars is squaring Saturn for the second time, and retrograding, it's squaring Pluto by October 9th for the second time, and retrograding, it's squaring Jupiter, still the earliest of the three of them, on October 18th. So it goes backwards through the three of them. It went forward, Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn. Now retrograde, it's going to go Saturn on September 29th, square Pluto on October 9th, and then square Jupiter on October 18th. And then in mid-November on the 13th, Mars turns direct, which means it's now going to square the three of them again for the third and final time. But now, because Jupiter has turned direct and Jupiter moves quickly, Jupiter's no longer in the same place. And so when it squares them again, it's now going to square Pluto first on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve. On December 23rd, Mars will square Pluto the third and final time. Then Mars will square Saturn on January 13th. And then Mars will square Jupiter on January 22nd. But by the time Mars squares Saturn on January 13th and Jupiter on January 22nd, by then Mars will have been moved into Taurus, and Jupiter and Saturn will both have moved into Aquarius. So the finality of this is very different than the setup, which is really where what I said I'll get to that later, is that at the setup, Saturn hitting the wall, hitting the authority, is the deciding factor right now in August. Boom. But when this whole thing plays through by January, it's a very different energy, because it ends up with that enthusiastic square to Jupiter, and Mars is in Taurus, where it's a very, very different energy than it was with the hot and spontaneous and overamping war kind of lean that it had while it was in Aries. Now you are welcome to make the summary.
Wow. So that's that bow pulling back. I can see what you're saying, because by that January period, it's going to be a totally different, it'll feel different. It'll have a different energy behind it and a different momentum by then.
Well, the momentum will be the momentum that's been created
right
all the way back from January, all the way back from the Saturn-Pluto conjunction back in the beginning of 2020. But the momentum will be influenced by all these events that have occurred, including the fact that both Jupiter and Saturn will have left Capricorn. They will join up in the first degree of Aquarius and then be squared by Mars for that third and final time. So there's a very different finishing point to this than there is a starting point.
And are all of these periods about a month? Like when we, because I know that last one is, because it starts December 24th and it goes to January 22nd. Are the other two?
The first one was August 4th to August 24th, so it's about 3 weeks or so. Mm-hmm. And the middle one on the retrograde is September 29th to October 18th. So again, a little bit over a half a month, a little bit less than 3/4 of a month. Like, okay. So they're all extended over a bit of a period of time, but even in between that period of time, it's like the issues don't go away, and they're not singular events. They're flows of energy. Because remember, aside from this, we have the moon whizzing around once a month, which means that every 7 days, the moon is going to make a conjunction, a square, or an opposition to this ongoing square between Mars and these Capricorn planets. Every time the moon moves through Aries, cardinal sign, Cancer, cardinal sign, Libra, cardinal sign, or Capricorn, cardinal sign, the moon is going to emotionally stir up the memory of these larger events so something can reincarnate. Tied to the same thing.
There you go. See, this is what I'm talking about. This is how you always bring it full circle. I love it. Okay. And maybe you don't plan to, but you do. All right. So here is the summary. and we'll talk about.
It's all planned. It's all planned.
Of course.
Yeah. In fact, it looks like I'm a spontaneous person, but I actually signed a contract, and every week I get the script for my week ahead, and I just do exactly what's on that script. How
perfect. It makes it so easy.
Summary.
Rick, so when we get closer to that December 24th time, let's talk about how the squares change. But I don't think we don't have time to do that today, but that'll be interesting.
No. But even as we get closer to the end of September, once Mars is going direct and playing back through this, we will begin to see the patterns of how what unfolds the very end of September through the first half of October, and how that comes back to what's going on now. And obviously a lot of this can be tied in the United States to the election, which obviously does not only have ramifications within the United States, but because of the U.S.'s role in the world, has very large ramifications around the planet. And the fact that this is all wrapped around that is not lost on me.
Okay. So basically what we have is Mars squared Jupiter, which is overamped enthusiasm. We have Mars squared Pluto, which is evolutionary, transformative. It's focusing on the war, not the individual battle, and ideal to focus on the good of all instead of the good of one. And then we have Mars square Saturn, which is this like accelerator brake energy. And basically it's wise and calculated to get the most effect. So to get the most effect of whatever action you want to take, it's better to be more calculated and maybe a little more restrained.
Yeah. Otherwise, if we're unrestrained and we're not paying attention, the Mars square Saturn becomes, oh crap, dad's home, or the cops just arrived.
Right.
Or geez, they just served me with a, with a subpoena because of my involvement in blah, 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 blah. That's the downside of a Mars square Saturn if we've overextended. And of course here, on the first two of them, the Jupiter on the first one, because the Jupiter comes first, the Jupiter encourages us to overextend.
Okay, so you said that the squares offer an opportunity and a trap. So each one of these has an opportunity and a trap, and we just have to be aware of the different plays of energy that might be happening within us, so that we can approach whatever's happening in our lives with that in mind. Okay. So this is happening now. It started August 4th. It's going to happen again in September. The order is going to go, so it went Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn this time. In September, it's going to go Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter. And then in December, it's going to go Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter.
Correct.
Okay. And, Rick, I walked outside last night and I saw Jupiter just hanging in the sky. And then I didn't see Pluto, but I knew it was there. And I saw Saturn. And it's amazing to actually visually connect with these planets. They just look like these beautiful, sparkly things in the sky. And I had this moment of like, wow, these alignments it's hard to not think of them bringing these things to us. I know we're not at the mercy of the planets. And at the same time, we're a part of their energy, and we're feeling their energy, and we're feeling their connection with each other and how it plays out with us. And it's amazing to see them in the sky together in that cluster.
Imagine, did I just interrupt you?
No, no, it's your enthusiasm. I don't want that to get stifled.
Imagine living a few thousand years ago and watching these planets. You see, as a planet goes retrograde, it gets brighter. Why does it get brighter? Because it gets closer to Earth. That's what a retrograde is.
Right.
And so during this time, over these next weeks and next month, Mars in the sky will be brighter than it ever is. It won't get so bright that it's brighter than the moon like that. I'm sure that email will go around again as it does every couple of years. But as planets retrograde, they get brighter. So if you can imagine being in ancient times, watching these planets that normally move like this, slow down, stop, get brighter, and then go back, is like, oh my God, what's going on? Are they coming for me? I mean, they're moving together. It was a very different feeling than we have now.
Okay, so we're in it. We're in this.
If we've reached the end, I have a retrograde poem I want to share. Short.
Oh yes, always the poems are welcome.
All right, let me set this up here. I'm pretty much set up, and and let me find the share screen there.
How many poems do you have, Rick?
Oh, hundreds.
Wow.
I don't have hundreds that I think are really good. I mean, I am a bit of a poetry, I wouldn't say scholar, but dilettante. I read poetry. I read poetry criticism. I read the academic stuff on poets. I love poetry. It's as close as language comes to music. But I've written some pretty bad poems that I would never share.
That reminds me, Gemini Brett, speaking of, he did a Facebook Live the other day, and he played, I don't know what instrument it was. It was like some sort of flute thing that he played the sound of a square. Yeah. He played this. Maybe he played the sound of Mars square Jupiter. Might have been. Anyways, and then it sounded so like in a movie where it's like where you just feel the tension and something's about to happen. That's right. What it sounded like. Right. But what he pointed out is that note always has a resolution. Like it's actually begging for a resolution. And so it has that weird moment of tension, but then it gets resolved. That's and he played both. And I love the musical representation of these aspects, because it helps us to feel it on an even deeper level beyond the words, like you're saying about poetry. And
as you know, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, my first love in life was music. I'm not a performer, although I have been coerced to perform. I studied as a kid piano, violin, trombone, baritone horn, played in high school orchestra, marching band, blah, 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 blah. And to me, astrology is really just very low frequency music. I mean, so I totally agree. And Brett and I have had conversations on this, that the idea of the music of the spheres, which comes to us from Pythagoras and Kepler, most people take that as a metaphor. It's not a metaphor. A metaphor is something that stands for something else. It's an actuality. The planets actually do create music, but it's so low frequency, instead of being like A above middle C that we use for concert tuning, which is 440 cycles a second. Instead of that, the planets are humming at 13 cycles a year, the moon 3 cycles a century, Saturn, and so on, but it's still music. Instead of hearing it, we dance to it. We don't hear it though. So now I'm going to share screen and I'm going to hit us up with the retrograde poem, and let's see if this pops up. There we go. Whoops, I did the wrong thing. There we go. Okay, so it's called Retrograde, and it goes like this. Heavenly forms, gods and spirits, abstract and transparent metaforms. There, the chief cook, commander supreme, looks down from multi-dimensions into the earth plane space-time coordinates. He stirs the slowly thickening soup, cosmic spoon in one hand, magic wand in the other. Round and round, stirring and stirring again and again and again, always the same way round. Concrete forms, humankind and technology, earthbound and solid. Here, a spectator, solitary in thought, looks up from 3 dimensions into the multi-dimensional universe. He watches the spinning wonders, astrolabe in one hand, quill pen in the other. Round and round go the planets, consistent and perfect their orbs, always the same way round on their journey encircling the sun. But no, what? What in heaven's name is this? Obvious cosmic imperfection? Systems within systems distort perspective. Orbital space and time relativity step on logic as if to scrape the stickings from the bottom of the pot, apparently arbitrarily, perceptually inarguable. The planets reverse direction, even if only from Earth's point of view. For a millennium, even longer, this was the ultimate unsolvable Rubik's Cube. The wandering of some stars, the movement of these planets, the meaning of the retrograde motion. Think Ptolemy, how can this be? Think Galileo, how can you learn more? Think Kepler, can you solve this mystery? Think Newton, what strange forces are at work here? Think Einstein, can you put the cube together? In abstract metaphysical realms, the unimaginable, unknowable chief cook licks the spoon, gives a few quick stirs against the normal motion. Whirlpools form within whirlpools, vortexes of energy stir up past visions, perturb the divine regularity, and cloud the forward motion of time. Earthbound, we watch the cosmic dance, trying to comprehend what we, in our cellular wisdom, already know. Retrograde.
Love that one, especially given the talk that we just had. I know you did that on purpose, but it just helped.
Total accident. What was in the script? I just followed the script.
That's exactly right. All right. So would you like to talk about Instagram?
Yeah, if you've been watching this thing, you're bored of hearing, but if you want my daily little blips, including a photograph with a short few words on it, and then a longer exposition of what I like to call the cosmic weather. This is not your individual signs. It's just what's going on up there, out there. That's Instagram, and it is the account is Rick Levine Astrologer. I got a couple of emails from people here last week that said they're not on Instagram. You can find it also on Facebook, and the Facebook is facebook.com/Rick Levine Astrologer. What a surprise.
Perfect. All right. And then I'll take this opportunity to talk about Cameron Allen's class that is now available It is Health Secrets of the Zodiac. Cameron Allen is an herbalist and astrologer, and he's put together a 7-hour course that goes through all of the zodiac signs and the different parts of the body that are associated with those signs of the zodiac, different manifestations that might be happening in your health based on the zodiac signs. Also, cell salts and crystals and all kinds of different practices that you can use to work with your zodiac sign, and with particular emphasis on the rising sign. But those of you that are more advanced in astrology, you'll start to be able to piece things together about your chart. We did a live show yesterday on the elements, astrology and your body and the elements. So if you want to get a sense for Cameron's teaching style, you can tune into that. That's available on the podcast. It's on YouTube. It's on Facebook, on Instagram. And if you'd like to join us for the class, we're open enrollment through August 23rd, and you can go to astrologyhub.com/secrets. That's astrologyhub.com/secrets. And Cameron's an amazing teacher, and we'd love to have any of you who are interested in how astrology and your body relate and how you can use your chart to help you have optimal health and vitality.
Sounds fascinating. And of course, if the metaphysical and the physical are connected, one being one side of the coin, so to speak, astrology as it relates to our body, to our health, to our physical manifestations, how stress or ease, are represented in the flow of our physicality. Fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love, Cameron has such a metaphysical perspective. It's really good. So we'd love to have you for that. Rick, thank you so much for being here with us again today for the Cosmic Connection. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Thanks for being a part of our community. And thank you, as always, for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you next week. Take care, everybody.